Here's a question for you. What would you do if the capital of Canada was right in the middle of New York State? It's kind of a strange thought, but the reality is that did happen. After World War II, Berlin, which was the former capital of Germany, was right in the middle of the Soviet quarter, which by that time they were starting to call the Deutsche Democratic Republic, the DDR for short, or we just called it East Berlin because most people can't speak German. And but here we had this western city of West Berlin, because right in the middle of Eastern Germany. So we had this, I don't know, we had this city with all of Western culture, grocery stores, discotheques, record shops, blue jeans, and other hedonistic ideas, right in the middle of the Soviet sphere of influence in Eastern Germany. And so they didn't like this, and so they wanted to take and make West Berlin part of East Germany. But how do you do this? Because you don't want to go to war, right? You don't want to go to you don't want armed conflict. And so instead what they go is, you know what? It's a city, and cities can't feed themselves, and so they're going to close down all the highways and all the railways going into West Berlin, and they're going to besiege the city essentially. And figuring that the Western powers were just going to let it go and say, or that the West Berlin was going to go, okay, we give up, we're now part of East Germany. But it didn't work out that way. You see, the English and Canadians and the French and the Americans especially decided that they were going to, since we couldn't bring things in on the ground, that we were going to bring it in the air. And this is going to be what we call the Berlin Airlift. All right, so we can't bring it in because if you bring, and there were some American military men that says, you know what, they can't stop our tanks. We're going to send a tank, and then right behind the tank is going to be all these big trucks with all this food, and we're going to restock those grocery stores whether they want us to or not. Problem is, that's an act of war. And we don't want to go to war with the Soviet Union because they have the bomb, we have the bomb, mutually assured destruction. Nobody's mad enough to do that. And so we're going to start carrying these supplies in. Problem is, nothing like this had ever been done before. Nothing like this had ever been. Aviation, while it was a few decades old, was still it wasn't like today where you have control towers and radar and people talking, and if something bad happens they talk you down or anything like that, right? They didn't have anything like that, and so all that stuff had to be invented, and it was invented as part of the Berlin Airlift. So here's what's going to happen. They're actually going to send thousands of airplanes into Berlin over a 2-year period, almost 2 years period, where they're going to bring food, newsprint, the necessities of life to the people in West Berlin, a city of over 1 million people. And they're going to do it all on airplanes. Some of the airplanes are going to be like the DC-10. The DC-10, they really like the DC-10 because the DC-10 sat at an angle after it lands. It's got 2 wheels and a small wheel back here. So when it lands, it goes like this, which means all you have to do is open up the back, give everything a quick shove, and it's right out the back of the airplane. So they have that one. They have the C-47, which can carry a lot more, but it's harder to offload because it's nice and flat. And the English are using their airplanes, and it's an amazing thing. And it shows the Soviet Union the willingness of the West to resist the spread of communism. But it also shows them the creativity of the West to prevent the spread of communism. All right, and then there's an interesting thing that happens. This is going to happen in the late 1940s. All right, actually, take the 52. A lot of the people who remember, this is Berlin. Less than 10 years earlier, the United States, England, France, Canada were at war with Germany. And now here they are feeding the Germans. And this is going to have a huge impact on the German people. They are going to go from seeing the United States and the Americans especially. They're going to go from looking at the Americans as maybe an occupying country or maybe the conquering country. At best, kind of neutral attitude towards them, to seeing the Americans as being friends. And those people who will not starve to death during the Berlin crisis are going to become the leaders of Germany in the 70s and in the 80s when things are very much in flux and trying to figure out what direction Germany is going to go. And they're going to build a huge amount of goodwill. And they do it through things like, for example, the candy bomber. The candy bomber was not supposed to be in Berlin. He was an American soldier from Utah. He was a pilot. And his squadron got the word that they were going to go to Berlin to deliver food. And his buddy had a wife who was pregnant. They were at Hill Air Base in Salt Lake, just north of Salt Lake. It's a city called Ogden in Utah. And his buddy's wife was pregnant. And so he went to the commander and said, you know what, my buddy's pregnant. Why don't you send me? I'm not married. And so send me instead. I got nobody here, so why not? And so the guy said, well, because you don't know how to fly a DC-10. He says, it's an airplane. You can teach me to fly a DC-10. All right, fine. If you can qualify on a DC-10, I'll send you. So he goes and he studies, flies, gets qualified on the DC-10 and goes to Germany. And so he goes over, and one of his very early, he's landing at the airport, and they're offloading his airplane and doing what they got to do. And so he gets out and he stretches and he looks along this fence, and there's a bunch of children. And he didn't have any kids himself. Had not married at that point. And it just broke his heart, he says. And so they had been warned, never give food to the children because the children will kill each other to get that food because there's so much starvation. They were told, don't give to the kids. And so he broke the rules. He had some gum. And he took the gum and he slipped it through the fence, and there was a fence, and these kids took the gum. And then the oldest kids took the gum, and they broke it into little pieces, and they handed it out to the kids that were around them. And this really impressed him. He says, oh, I got to do something about this. And so he goes and while he flies back to his base, and while his plane is being reloaded and refueled, he goes to the PX, that's the post exchange for non-military people, and he buys out all of their candy and gum that he has. Now, all the money he has, he spends it all on gum, and he goes back, and this time when he goes back, he gives it out again. And so now they're all like, oh man, you're awesome and everything like this, right? And he says, you know what? You watch for me, okay? And I'll give you some more candy. So you just got to make sure you watch for me. He says, well, how are we going to know it's you? He says, well, as I come in, I'm going to wobble my plane like this, okay? I'm going to make my plane wobble, dance a little bit so that you'll know it's me. So that you'll know, gather everyone together, and I'll drop some candy out the window for you. And so he does that. So then he goes and he uses all of his handkerchiefs to make little parachutes so that, because, well, he's not flying super, super high, dropping a candy bar from that altitude could kind of hurt somebody. So he's tying all this candy. So he stays up all night tying candy to these handkerchiefs. He steals his... he wasn't one for following rules, was he? Anyway, so he steals his bunkmate's handkerchiefs and makes them more. They're like, what are you doing? And he tells them what he's doing. He's like, oh man, we want to do this too. And so within several years, or within a few days, what's happening, sorry, not years, but a few days, what's happening is all these American soldiers and these pilots are spending a lot of their money going to the PX, buying out all the candy and gum, and dropping it from airplanes. They're doing a little whiz, shimmy, shimmy, right? And dropping candy to the German children. It's a great example of humanity in a time that was, though there wasn't a lot of kindness going around. Um, these were children who were born. Many of them would have been born in the middle of the war. A decade earlier, these pilots would have been involved in not dropping candy, but dropping bombs. And it is a great story of the humanity, the difference that kindness can make, even one person's kindness can make, and how that kindness can spread. I love watching my wife tell this story because she bawls and she just cries and cries and cries at this story. So, if nothing else, history is filled with all sorts of tragic events. It really is, but you know what? Sometimes history, even in the middle of all the darkness, history is filled with little points of light. Things like George Herbert Walker Bush once called 1,000 points of light, and so the Berlin Airlift was one of those bright points. And so I hope that maybe, just maybe, that'll give you a little bit of a brightness today. So till then, I'll talk to you later.